Hope and Faith. And on this I want broadcast, some of you may have just seen me, but anyway, for this broadcast, I wanted to talk about tips for helping a person with a severe and persistent illness. And I'm going to be talking about mental illness, and some of this can be applicable maybe to other illnesses as well. This is coming from, I want to make sure I give credit, coming from schizophrenia.com website, as well as It's Getting Better All the Time, mentalhealthoutreach.org, as well as information from some of our other peers and partners. I just wanted to, to share. And actually, I will put a link. It's on our website, schizophrenia.com, as well. It's a nonprofit source of information, support, and education, and they specifically focus on people with schizophrenia. And I wanted to share some of the things that they have here, okay? Number one, and this particular article is written by Rex Dickens, okay? And it's from the schizophrenia.com website. It will be on our website at igbatt.com. I'll make sure, I'll probably put it in the thing here. igbatt.com as well. Number one, he talks about you cannot cure a mental disorder for a family member. And this is written from one family member to another, but like I said, I'm broadening this out. I'm using some of their stuff as well as some of our information from It's Getting Better All the Time. So you cannot cure a mental disorder for a family disorder, and that is correct. You cannot cure a mental disorder for a family member. It doesn't matter, you can be an aid, you can be a support, but at some point, and we want you to be an aid, we want you to be a support, because many times, and I'm talking to family members now, or friends and family members, you may be the only person that your loved one has. You know, you may be the only person. One of the things I always share when I'm working in the clinic, that when we have clients, that consumers or individuals come to us, I try to encourage my staff to make sure that we get as much information as we can about the individual, as far as where they came from, where they're from, any next of kin, et cetera, because unfortunately, for many of clients that I work with, or individuals that I work with, the outpatient mental health clinic staff is the only family that they have, right? It's the only family that they have. So I always try to encourage people, if you are a family member, a friend, a loved one of a person who's living with a severe and persistent mental illness, thank you. I know it can be a tough job, but God bless you, and I mean that literally, because you are literally standing in the gap for that individual. My partner that's here with me, Sister Kelly, she always says, use that term, standing in the gap for that individual, because if you don't advocate for that individual, no one else will. Okay, but it's important to realize that you can't cure a mental disorder. Okay, and when we're talking about mental disorders, we're talking about brain illnesses. We're talking about biologically based illnesses. Again, I'm not here. I understand that when we talk about from a spiritual standpoint, that there are mental illnesses, that there are illnesses that are spiritually based. Then there are illnesses, or that can be that spiritually, that can be impacted. Right now, that's not what I'm talking about here. I'm only talking about medical disorders. That's what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about anything else here. We do that as well, and we do believe that as well, but for this broadcast, that's not what I'm talking about. I don't think yet. So when you're talking about a person with a mental illness, and for this broadcast, I'm talking about severe and persistent mental illnesses. When we talk about severe and persistent mental illnesses, we're talking about illnesses that are so severe that they impact all aspects of an individual's life. We're talking about illnesses that even with medications, individuals may never really be free of all their symptoms, okay? So we're talking about things like schizophrenia, bipolar disorders. This is what I'm talking about here. Severe and persistent or chronic depression. That's what I'm talking about here, okay? Despite your efforts, symptoms may get worse or may improve. So as a loved one, friend or family member, let me say this. don't beat yourself up if you've tried to do all that you can do and your loved one won't take their medications, they won't go to treatment, they're not doing the things that you would ask them to do. Don't beat yourself up. You're doing the best you can with the information that you have. Okay? The only thing I would also encourage, if you have not done, is find out who your loved one's psychiatrist is, clinical social worker, clinical team. Reach out to them for help, for support. If you have a loved one, friend, family member who is living with a severe illness, a severe persistent mental illness in particular, you must know that as a loved one, as a family member or friend, that relapse is more than likely possible because it's a chronic illness. When you talk about a chronic illness, relapse happens, right? Episodes happen. So you want to be prepared for the next episode. You want to be prepared, or you want to tell in your mind that what will I do when this happens again? Not if it happens again, but when it happens again. Because again, we're talking about persistent chronic illnesses. The same thing if you're living with diabetes or you're living with hypertension. When you any chronic disease, you should know that there are going to be episodes, right? Same thing with severe and persistent mental illness. So you don't want to beat yourself up, but what I would add is making sure that you know who your loved one's treatment team is. That you have a phone number to that individual or to those individuals. If you can, you want to try to accompany your loved one to the doctor's appointment at least once, right? So that you can, meet everybody, they know you. Also, you want to try to make sure or encourage your loved one, and if you're there, it's no problem, that they sign the appropriate releases so that you can talk to your doctor, your loved one's doctor, friend, family member, whoever you are, I'll just say loved one, without going through the HIPAA rules and regulations and all that stuff, right? So you want to make sure that you sign a release of information, you get your loved one to do that, okay? But again, so despite your efforts, symptoms may get worse. Despite your efforts, your loved one may still wind up on the street. Because living with someone with a severe persistent mental illness, especially if that person is in a stage where actively psychotic, and in the last episode I talked about psychotic being out of touch with reality, hallucinations and delusions. They may not want your help. And sometimes all you can do is wait until they get to the point where they have no choice, right? But your loved one may wind up on the street. Your son, your daughter may wind up on the street, and that's definitely hard. Because it's hard to see your loved one out there, and they have a bed. You're a good parent. You're a good husband and wife. You don't understand what's going on. Don't beat yourself up. Sometimes when the delusions, the hallucinations, when the illness starts talking to them, that's all they can hear at the time. You're doing the best you can, so don't beat yourself up. Okay? Sometimes there are certain feelings that you have as a loved one. And again, whatever your capacity is. One of the feelings that you might feel is anger, and it's okay. You might feel resentment, and it's okay. Okay? Especially in cases when it's a sibling, right? Because it's your birthday, but your brother or sister is getting all the attention, right? It's your parents should be at your game, but they can't because of what's going on with your sibling. It's okay to admit that bothers you. It's okay to admit that it makes you angry. It's okay to admit that you're hurt by it. It's okay to admit that you feel resentment. It happens. You're human, right? I don't care who you are. You can be a saint, rabbi, priest, pastor, whatever the case is. Whatever. It's okay. Feelings, and I keep saying that over and over again, it's okay to feel how you feel, right? To feel upset. Like, wow, he's always getting all the attention. It's okay to feel that way. And it's important for parents to kind of, to remember that, hey, you do have more than one kid. You do have more than one child. It's okay for parents, it's important for parents to remember that. But sometimes when they're in the middle of it, when they're in the middle of the crisis, it's kind of hard for them to stop what they're doing because they're in the middle of the crisis. So just kind of remember that. It's okay to feel resentment. Now, sometimes if you're feeling resentment as a loved one, you have to ask yourself, why are you feeling resentment? Sometimes we're feeling resentment because we're doing too much. You're just doing too much. And this is something, one of the tips, and I'm reading this straight from schizophrenia.com, and this particular article is specifically written to family members. And I'm reading this article, I'm reading some of the things out of it, and I'm also talking about some of my experiences as well. And people say, well, why do you keep referencing the article? Because I believe it's a pet peeve of mine. If you get something from somebody, reference them and give them credit. Don't steal. People are stealing people's sermons, stealing people's ideas. They're stealing people, writings and not giving them credit. That's not, I don't want to do that. I want to make sure you know I'm reading from schizophrenia.com, and I'm just adding my experiences and other information to it. So again, if you feel much resentment, you could be giving too much. What it says here, number 3, if you feel much resentment, you are giving too much. And I would definitely agree with that. I would just kind of add to it, is definitely take a look at why you're feeling resentment. Because sometimes you're feeling resentment because it's normal to feel resentment. I'm giving up everything, I'm doing this, I'm doing that. Again, you're doing too much. You may need to pull back. Okay? It is, number 4, it is as hard for the individual to accept the disorder as it is for other family members. It is as hard for the individual to accept the disorder as it is for other family members. Let's talk about that, okay? It's hard for other individuals to accept, it's hard to accept the disorder. Many times when you talk about it, let me say, there are a couple scenarios, right? If for an individual who, let's say, was doing pretty well, example, I was working with this individual, young guy. He was the top of his class, young, he was in the top of his class. He had gotten a full scholarship to go to one of these top 10 colleges, right? Real bright guy, real smart guy. He went away to college, and as I mentioned before, I talked about the stress vulnerability model. He went away to college, had his first psychotic break, being out of touch with reality. He came back home. The college gave him an opportunity, stay home for a little while, and come back later, when you're feeling better. He came to the clinic. We started working with him, but because of he had accomplished so much, and I'm being careful with my words, right? So because he had accomplished so much, it was hard for him and his family to grasp that he even had a disorder, right? So it was hard for him to accept that he had a disorder, right? It was hard for him to accept that the things that he was feeling was associated with a disorder, right? It's similar to an individual with a substance use disorder. Many times a person with a substance use disorder has to have a few relapses before they realize that maybe I have something going on. Because what happens is if a person is functioning at a very high level, they're working, they have a family, doing well, and they're able to manage it, and they have a psychotic break, or they have a problem with substance use, it's hard for them to believe that I really have a disorder, that there's really something wrong with me, right? People like that, unfortunately, have to have many times where they hit the wall before they realize that something is wrong with them. Many times what individuals will do is they will test the diagnosis, right? So in cases where individual, we talk about substance disorder, right? They really not convinced. Okay, they'll do the AANA, they'll go through the steps, they'll attend the meetings. In case with people with a mental disorder diagnosis, they'll take the medications, they'll meet with the psychiatrist, they'll they'll attend the therapy counseling sessions for a little while, they'll attend even NAMI groups, and they'll do all these types of stuff, right? But they're really not convinced. So what happens is they'll stop taking the medications, They'll stop taking the medications. They'll stop going to AA. They'll stop, or NA, whatever the case is. They'll stop attending meetings. They stop doing the things that they should be doing to remain healthy because they really were never convinced. Okay, so they'll stop doing it, and then they have a relapse. And that's what happens sometimes. So when you talk about it's hard for individuals to accept the disorder as it is for family members, sometimes it's difficult. You know, we talk about, Kanye West, for example, okay? Kanye West, from what I can tell or what I've heard, is definitely a bipolar disorder. I'm not sure if it's one or two. I don't know him, just from what I've seen. But he's typical. He's typical. People will say, why don't he take his medication? Why don't he take his medications? Well, that's what happens to people. The high, especially when you're functioning at a certain level, it takes a while for you to be convinced, right? And then you think that you can outsmart the disorder. You think that you can, people just begin to test the disorder. They test it. Okay, I'm fine now. I don't have to take, instead of taking 2 pills, I'll take 1. Or I can take a little, 1 drink. Okay, now I can be around people who are doing drugs. It's not going to bother me, because I'm strong, I can do that. And it's not until they hit bottom or until they hit the wall again, until they realize that, hey, maybe there's something to this. So that's not uncommon for people to not accept the diagnosis. And it's also not uncommon for family members to not accept the diagnosis. It takes family members as well, because again, he was doing well before. She was doing well before. The problem was that she went away to school and they put some drugs, they put something in her drink. That's why she's acting this way, right? So it takes people a little while to realize that. But it is difficult. So you got to realize, if it's hard for you as a loved one, and it is hard for the individual as well. No one wants to have a chronic disorder. No one wants to have to take medications. Like, for example, recently, I was going back and forth with my doctor. He was saying about hypertension. And I'm like, I'm not hypertension. I just need to lose weight. I just need to do this. I just need to do that. Well, because I don't want to take medications, right? So I don't want to take medications. I'm just going to lose the weight. So I went back again, and it was really, really high, supposedly. So I'm like, oh, no, I'm going to lose weight. I'm going to lose the weight. And then I had to ask myself, so like, when you going to plan on losing the weight? Because in my mind, if I lose the weight, exercise, and eat right, I won't have hypertension. I'll be fine. And that may or may not be true. The problem is I hadn't really been doing, losing that, working hard to lose the weight like that. So I'm saying I'm going to do all these things because I really don't want to take the medications. I really don't want to be diagnosed with hypertension. I don't want to join that group of having to take pills because I don't take any medication now. I don't have to take any medication. So in my mind, I'm going to do whatever I need to do not to have to take it. Well, I had to start taking it. So I'm taking the pills now. But in my mind, I keep telling myself, I'm going to, this is only for a little while. It's only for a little while. We'll see. But the same process happens with individuals with any disorder. Nobody wants to be able to take, to admit that something is wrong with me. No one wants to admit that I have a disorder, that I have a diagnosis. Whether it's a mental disorder or a medical disorder, no one wants to admit that, okay? That's just how we are as human beings. It's the same thing when you're living with a mental disorder. And for some mental disorders, I'm sorry, I just have to do something real quick. The medications, some of the medications that you have to take, and taking them for a long time, people don't want to do that, okay? People just don't want to do that, so just be clear with that. Okay, number 5, and this is from schizophrenia.com, and again, I'm just elaborating as well. They have acceptance of the disorder by all concerned may be helpful but not necessary. Acceptance of the disorder by all concerned may be helpful but not necessary. If I know that I'm living with a mental disorder, that I have to take, there's something going on with me, and I'm living with the symptoms of a mental disorder, you may not accept it, and that's okay. Okay, you may think that I'm just not praying enough, that I'm not fasting enough, that I'm not reading my word enough, and that's okay, because that's how you believe. Okay, I'm the one that have to deal with my the symptoms that I have to deal with. I'm the one that's going in and out of the hospital because because of diabetes, or because of my cancer, or because of whatever it is, right? You don't have to accept it. And number 6, a delusion will not go away by reasoning and therefore needs no discussion. And that is so true. You do not need, if I believe that this TV is talking to me, and I really believe that, it doesn't matter what you say, I'm not going to believe, I don't believe you, right? And the thing is, you have to know that. When you have to understand that this is a delusion, and because this is a delusion, the person is not going to, you're not going to convince the individual, right? The delusion is a symptom of the disorder. You treat the disorder, that delusion will either go away or decrease, right? What happens sometimes is, especially if a person is really holding on to the delusion, they will pretend like they understand what you're saying, but they won't. I was working with this guy one time who was he was pretending that he was a police officer, was it highway patrol or sheriff? He was pretending to be a police officer. And evidently, he had everybody in the neighborhood fooled. He was, did a lot, he's with the neighborhood watch. He even had the police T-shirts and all this kind of stuff that they wear, and he had everybody convinced. He was in 7-Eleven, and he ran into some real, I want to say sheriffs. It was the sheriff department. Anyway, he ran into some real police, and I don't know, from the conversation, they found out he wasn't, and anyway, he wound up at the outpatient mental health clinic. And he was one of these guys where, he would say that he, oh yeah, no, I know I'm not a police officer, but he never really believed it. But because of how he functioned, people just thought, that they had cured him, so to speak. Oh yeah, he no longer believes this way. Well, wasn't the case, because he still thought that he was in fact a police officer. But that's what happens with a delusion. They really don't believe you, even if they pretend to believe you, because in their minds, something's wrong with you. There's something wrong with you that you don't know that former President Obama was just at my house last night. You can show me all you want. No, this is a picture of President Obama. He's in California. He was there all week. Because I know you don't know. President Obama and I, we are friends, and I know him, and he was just at my house last night. You can say whatever you want to say. You don't need to be going back and forth with me. That's a symptom of the disorder. Okay? Number 8, separate the person from the disorder. And this is so important. Love the person even if you hate the disorder. And I have to smile at that, because that is so true. Sometimes if you are a family member, friend, loved one, and you are living with someone who who's living with schizophrenia, you may have to separate from that individual. It may be, you may have to separate permanently or temporarily. But you may have to separate from that individual for your own sanity. Because no one knows what it's like to live with an individual with an untreated mental illness unless you've done it before, right? No one knows what it's like to have to listen to your loved one walk the floor all night, okay? Open every cabinet, go in and out of every cabinet, right? Boom, 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 all throughout the night. To take your food that you just bought and throw it in the trash. Or to, leave the house and walk around the neighborhood with no clothes on, and now you're embarrassed. You don't know what's that like. You don't know what it's like for your loved one to get on Twitter or to get on any social media and say just anything about you, okay, because of their illness. So sometimes as a family member, friend, you have to separate. That doesn't mean you don't love the individual. It doesn't mean that you're not still their biggest advocate. It just that means that for your sake, for your peace of mind, you may have to separate, okay, for a certain period of time. You may have to work to advocate to get your loved one help, whether that's a group home, whether that's on the right medications, and you may have to live in the next apartment over, okay, because it's difficult. It's easier said than done. It always, I always, again, not but it's always interesting to me when you have, I'm not going to say, people who really don't, or haven't worked with severe and persistent mental illness, whether they are even other mental health professionals who don't, they may work with people who are at a certain functioning, but to work with everyday people with severe persistent mental illnesses, and some of the things that my colleagues say, I'm just like, are you kidding? If it was that easy, it would have already been done. But I'm telling you, if you're living with a person with a severe persistent mental illness, some of the things that you'll have to endure and go through, it's not going to be found in a book. Okay, some of the things that you have to do, there's some family members, and again, I salute you, you come up with just ingenious ways to get things done, to get your loved one to take medications, right? Just for your own sanity. So again, you can love the individual, but hate the disorder, and that's okay. Okay, it's okay to say, again, I said before, that I'm angry about this. It's okay to feel resentment. It's okay to feel that way. It's important for you to have somebody, an outlet, whether it's your preacher, your pastor, whether it's a colleague, a friend, family member that you can talk to. That you can just share, hey, this is how I'm feeling today. Okay. 9, separate medication side effects from the disorder in the person. The medications that they're taking sometimes can cause different side effects. It is not okay for you to be neglected. You have needs and wants too. And that is so true. You want to take care of yourself. I had a neighbor who her husband had a chronic illness, and it was all about him. They had to take him to the hospital, and while she was at the hospital, I don't know, again, what the doctor noticed, but he noticed something. While he was working with the husband, he noticed something about the wife, and she wound up being admitted to the hospital and eventually died, right? She eventually died, and, they had to send him back home. She's dead, and the man that she was taking care of, her husband, was now being cared for by somebody else. So as a caretaker, you have to take care of you. Okay? Jesus Christ died. You don't have to die again. Okay? Jesus Christ died so that you might have life and life more abundantly. Right? As you pray and you seek Him, He'll give you a strategy, an idea, and a plan to deal with what you have to deal with. You don't have to try to be a superhero. You don't have to try to prove a point. If you're tired, then you're tired. If you don't feel like doing it today, then you don't feel like doing it today. That's why it's so important. If you are a caretaker for a person with a severe and persistent mental illness or persistent illness, is that you allow other people to help you. There are resources out there in your community. You need to reach out to other people. God never made us to live alone in a vacuum. I think it's so sad when I hear people talk about, oh, they don't need people, they don't want to be around people, they hate people. Well, there's going to come a day, well, hopefully it doesn't, God forbid, that you're going to need people. You're going to need resources. So it's important that you reach out to people, that you know who you can call, that you talk to your loved one's doctor, okay, about certain resources. Okay, what can I do? Get help. There's respite services out there. There are people that can come into the home. There are things that you can do. You want to reach out, right? You don't want to try to do this by yourself because it can be difficult. Right? You don't want to let pride get in the way, because sometimes it's a pride thing. I don't want people in my business. I don't want people to know what I'm going through. And sometimes you're just doing it because you have to do it, right? Because you feel like there's no one else. What would happen? And I used to ask this question all the time to loved ones. What would happen if you dropped dead today? What would happen if you dropped dead? Your loved one, what would happen to them? trust me, they would find a way to go on, right? So you want to start thinking of they would find a way to go on in some cases. In some cases, the same resources that you claim that you don't want to bother with, they would come on board, come on online, come on board and help the individual out. So you want to make sure that you're taking care of yourself, okay? As a caretaker, when you're taking your loved ones to their primary care doctor, when was the last time you had a physical? When was the last time you had blood work done? That you had your A1C3 checked, okay? Right, when was the last time you saw a primary care doctor and had everything done? When was the last time you had a pap smear or you had a cancer screening? Okay, all of these things, you got to take care of yourself. The illness of a family member is nothing to be ashamed of. Reality is that you may encounter discrimination from an apprehensive public. You just may. But it's nothing to be ashamed of. Just like having cancer is nothing to be ashamed of. Just like having diabetes or hypertension is nothing to be ashamed of. These bodies get sick. No one is to blame, so don't blame yourself. Don't forget your sense of humor. For people who are have been doing this for a long time, whether as a family member or as a helper, sometimes you understand that sometimes you have to laugh to keep from crying, right? Sometimes you just have to do that, because if you don't, you will always be depressed, because this can be it's a task. It can be a task. I think about think about some family members, and we've talked about in the past where you've had situations where you may have had to call the police, right? No crisis team in the area. You had to call the police to help with your loved one because your loved one was acting a certain way or they wasn't taking their medications. And as soon as the police came through the door, your loved one, who was just 5 seconds ago acting a certain way and just sitting in the chair just as calmly, and you're looking like, what the heck just happened? And we talk about these things in our group, and you have to laugh at things like that, because this is the loved one that was just giving you a hard time, was just up all night, not taking medications, bouncing off the wall, so to speak. And as soon as the police show up, your loved one has the police officer looking at you like there's something wrong with you, right? And that happens sometimes, right? So again, sometimes you have to find the humor in some of this, right? Because if not, it can be really hard on you. Again, not necessarily laughing at the situation, the person, but just the irony of the situation. So don't forget your sense of humor. It may be necessary to renegotiate your emotional relationship, which is similar to what I said before. Sometimes you may have to step away. Sometimes you may have to check into a hotel, or you may have to have somebody else come. Sometimes you may have to, reach out to other people. Sometimes you may have to divorce. Sometimes you may have to separate. Sometimes you may have to, depending on the situation. And again, no one can judge you but you. You know what your situation is. It may be necessary to revise your expectations. And that's a big one. Especially in cases, going back to the story I started telling before about the young man who was super smart, had gotten to a really good college, one of the top 10 in the country, and had his first psychotic break and had to come home. He had his first psychotic break and had to come home. As I said, we were working with him. He kind of sort of didn't buy it. But we were trying to, because he was young, because of his age, there's a lot of different resources and different research. We did what we can to kind of help him, spoke to the family. The father got it a little bit, the mother not so much. So we suggested that the doctor, myself, some of the other clinical team, because the school had given him time, right? Had given him time, and this kid had gotten a scholarship, okay? And I'm not going to name the school, but it's one of the top 10 schools. So, and they were willing to give him time. The family rushed it. They rushed it because, again, he didn't really quite accept the diagnosis. They rushed it. He went back to school. Things didn't go well. He lost his scholarship, etc., etc. And then he was permanently, discharged from the school. But it was one of those things where the family, we were talking about expectations, right? He may not be able to, when he had his first break, okay, before he went back to school the second time, we talked about expectations. No, he may not be able to go back to school and finish this year, but let's look at maybe next year, okay? We're trying to revamp expectations. No, your loved one may not be able to complete his medical degree, get his complete medical school right now. Let's look at maybe some medications, let's look at some therapy, and who knows, maybe later on. Or maybe he may not be able to be a police officer. Maybe we can look at volunteering. So again, adjusting the expectations. No, I may not be able to run a marathon, but maybe I may be able to join the wheelchair Olympics or something. You got to look at expectations. Sometimes people are unwilling to adjust to their expectations. Here's the thing. When we look at acceptance from an illness, whether it's a mental illness, severe and persistent mental illness, or severe and persistent mental disorder, it may require you to make some adjustments and to accept certain things. You may have to accept the fact that life may not go the way you thought it was going to go. You may have to accept the fact that your son and daughter is diagnosed with schizophrenia. Okay? You may have to accept the fact that no matter how much you pray and fast, your loved one, or even yourself, is diagnosed with COVID. You may have to accept the fact that no matter how much you exercise, you may be a vegan, you may, drink boiled water, your air is purified, all this type of stuff. You may have to accept the fact that with all of that, you are still diagnosed with cancer. Things happen, unfortunately, okay, to these bodies. Acceptance. One of the biggest challenge is getting people to accept their illness. It doesn't mean that you're giving up. It doesn't mean that you stop praying, that you stop fasting. It just means that you accept where you are at this particular moment in time. Doesn't mean that things won't change. No, it just means that this is where I am. Some people, especially from a faith perspective, you get into this battle with God, and you're not going to win. There's some people get angry. Well, I prayed and this didn't happen, or I fasted and this didn't happen. Or if I was really a good Christian and you think you can do all these wonderful things, or if I was a good Muslim, or whatever your thing is, if I was a good Christian, if I just prayed, fasted, things wouldn't have gone this way. And sometimes that doesn't happen that way. In the Bible, a group of people, disciples, asked Jesus, well, who sinned? Did he do it, or was it his family members, his parents? And Jesus said nobody sinned, right? So sometimes things happen, but we get ourselves caught up when we try to, to me it's a lot of his pride. You want to try to boss God around, or boss life around, and life has a way of showing us who's boss, doesn't it, right? Sometimes you just have to accept the fact, okay, I do have an illness. I am diagnosed with depression. I am living with schizophrenia. My wife did leave me. My husband did clean out the bank account. Whatever it is, okay, this is where I am in life. God, what is my next step? Sometimes you have to accept where you are. Jesus Christ came that we might have life and life more abundantly. Having abundant life doesn't mean that you don't have any problems or any challenges. You can have abundant life in the midst of the challenges and the problems, if we will begin to take a look at how we think and how we adjust our thinking, our expectations. Okay? Success for each individual may be different. Okay? When we talk about recovery, when we say recovery is possible, for some people living with a severe persistent illness or mental illness, your success may be completing your high school diploma, or getting a high school diploma. For others, it may be getting a job. For others, it may be taking your medications for every day, or as you're supposed to, for at least a month. For someone else, it may be being able to stay out of the hospital, right? So it varies. Success is different for different people. Okay, acknowledge the remarkable courage your family member may show dealing with a mental disorder. And again, it takes courage, it takes strength, especially if you are a parent and you have more than one child, and you have a child with an illness, chronic illness. It takes a lot. It takes a lot. Your family member is entitled to his own life journey as you are. So again, your loved one may be diagnosed with schizophrenia, but they're entitled to live their own life, just like you are. Talk about your feelings. This actually, there's a lot here. I'm not going to read. I'm going to just kind of skim through. Grief issues for siblings are about what you had and lost. For adult children, the issues are about what you never had. So again, when you talk about grief, right? We think about grief around death, but when you talk about living with a chronic illness, there is a grief that goes along with that as well, because you're grieving the fact that your child will not be what you thought he or she would be. You're grieving the fact as a husband or wife that this marriage is not what you thought it was going to be, right? If you're the person that's living with the illness, you're grieving the fact that life didn't go the way you thought you was going to go. So everybody in the family, in the group, the dynamic may be feeling some sort of grief. And it's important to kind of talk about that, okay? Okay. And as I said before, the mental illnesses, like other diseases, are can be a part of life. Mental illness is a biological brain disorder, as I said before. It is absurd to believe you may correct a physical illness such as diabetes. It's the same thing with schizophrenia, right? Schizophrenia is one of those diseases, schizophrenia and bipolar, where we know medications work, okay? Medications work. It's not with some of the other ones, you may be able to get away with just talk therapy, but with schizophrenia and bipolar disorder in particular, medications are needed. Almost all the time, medications are needed. Now I know somebody going to say, well, my cousin has diagnosed with schizophrenia and he didn't have to take medications. 1/3 of the cases, when you look at researchers, we know there are 1/3 of the cases where that may happen. But 9 times out of 10, you're going to need some type of medication, whether that's long-term or short-term. So if you have a cousin that was diagnosed with schizophrenia and no longer needs to take medication, God bless him or her. Sometimes that does happen, especially as a person gets older. And if they've been living with schizophrenia for a long period of time and they've been doing the work, meaning they've been doing other things to manage their illness. They know about their triggers. They know about their symptoms. They know what their stresses are. And they're praying. They're reading their word. They're going to, or they may have gone to meetings in the past where meaning they have skills that they can fall back on. They're able to self-regulate themselves. They may not need to take medication or as much medications. We know as people get older, their medications profile may change. Okay, so that happens. And then there are some people who are diagnosed with schizophrenia who may never have to take medications, but that's few. That's few. Okay? So that's for the people who are going to write me and tell me about your cousin. My cousin doesn't have to take medication. The disorder may be periodic, and sometimes, as I said before, when we talk about psychosis, a person is not psychotic all of the time, right? There may be fluctuations up and down. Strange behavior is a symptom of the disorder, so don't take it personally. Don't take it personally when your loved one says things to you that he or she shouldn't be saying, that hurts your feelings, or that hurts your feelings, and it can be really cruel sometimes. Maintain your role as a sibling, child, or parent of the individual. Don't change your role. What does this mean? And this is a good one here. Many times when a person is first sick, whatever it is, right? The family member, friends we take on a more paternalistic role. We go, my mother had to remind me of this, right? Well, I took her to the doctor one time, and I was in there with the doctor, and she didn't like the fact that the doctor was talking to me. She said, why is he talking to you? I'm in the room. So she told me she didn't want me going with her anymore, right? Because, and sometimes that happens, because when a person is first diagnosed with an illness, everybody comes around. The doctor is talking to the family members, he's talking to the friends or whoever he or she is in the room. The doctor's talking to, it's the family member that's advocating, it's the friend that's doing all the talking. And sometimes if you're not careful, the family, the loved one with the illness can be right in the room. The doctor is not talking to the person with the illness. The doctor and the loved ones are talking. And the person in the room is just sitting there. And they're just going back and forth. And the doctor's not saying anything to the person with the illness. And then the loved one is not saying anything to the person with the illness. That happens initially, and sometimes that's important. Sometimes you need that at some point. But as that person gets better, it's important for people to remember their place. Remember, you are not if it's a mother or father, okay, you are not the mother. Your mother is the mother. Your father is the father. You are the child. We need you to fall back in that child place. Or if you are the brother or the sister, you are the brother or the sister. You are not the parent. And even if you're the parent, you are the parent. You're not the person that make all the responsibility, the choices, right? You have to learn at some point to fall back. So at some point, there's a point where everybody's going to come together, okay, and take the lead. But you have to know when to fall back. You have to know when to let your loved one begin to become the person they were designed to be, that God designed them to be. They don't need you to talk for them all the time, because if you talk for them all the time, then they're not going to talk. They don't need you, you can encourage and nudge, but you shouldn't always be the one that's taking the lead all the time. Remember, you are the parent, you're the sibling, husband, wife, you're not the patient. Okay, you're not the person that's living with the illness. So we want to try to empower as much as possible the person that's living with the illness to learn how to manage their illness, okay? 42, mental health professionals have varied degrees of competence, and that's true. I went to a conference one time, and in this conference, there was, people are like, you got so many stories. Yep, I have a lot of stories. I've been doing this for a long time, and severe persistent mental illness is my passion, so I've been doing this for a long time. But anyway, I went to a conference, and in this particular conference, there was a psychologist. These people, if I've told you their names, these are world-renowned people, okay? The mistake that they made, okay, is that they announced the conference, the topic that they were doing, and the topic was something, I can't really remember the topic, but the topic was something like 12 ways to deal with severe mental illness. It was one of these topics that promised a lot, okay? It promised a lot. So they had a lot of people that showed up who are family members, that were friends, loved ones, people who are living with severe and persistent mental illness, because severe and persistent mental illness are not the same thing as mental illnesses, as I've talked about before, right? You have mental illnesses, then you have severe and persistent mental illness. They're not always the same thing. Mental health professionals that work with severe and persistent, that work with mental illnesses may not be good at working with severe and persistent mental illnesses. It's different skill sets, okay? So it was just kind of sad, because the audience ate these people alive, because they kept asking, and these well-known psychiatrists, psychologists, they couldn't answer the questions, right? Because the people wanted to know. It was practical, real life, rubber meets the road. What do I do at 5 o'clock or 3 o'clock in the morning when this is happening with my loved one type questions, right? And they were giving book answers or answers, like when a person comes in to see a psychiatrist, people with severe and persistent mental illness don't come into a psychiatrist's office and sit on a couch and lay down type thing. It's not that kind of, it's not that kind of, it's different, okay? So that is true. You want to know what experience does this person have, this psychiatrist, like psychologists have, working with people with severe and persistent mental illness. I had a chance to go to NIH. They were having a conference. And again, they were talking about medications and, the importance of prescribing several different types of medications, and they had come up with this idea that sometimes people have to take more than one medication, and they again, it was a topic that promised a lot that didn't deliver. So you had people, my colleagues, the psychiatrists that I work with, we went to the meeting, and it was like people in the audience ate them alive, right? Because they were clearly, the only experience that they had was research experience, book experience. They didn't have any real world, rubber meets the road, inpatient, hospital, chronic, community mental health experience, right? And I remember saying to one of the doctor was with me, "You didn't know this?" He was like, it was just like a waste of everybody's time. So again, you want to make sure that when you ask questions, because everybody doesn't have the same level of competence. Everybody doesn't have the same skill set when you talk about, especially severe and persistent mental illnesses. Okay, I just wanted to share those because I thought that was it was interesting. You want to find out. Okay, this is a nice office. Have you always been in an office? What other things have you done? Because many times people have the only work that they've done with severe and persistent mental illness is during their training or other places. So just kind of keep that in mind. It is important to have boundaries and set clear limits. I'm reading from schizophrenia.com. It's a from a website. It's a nonprofit organization that focuses just on schizophrenia, and they have put together a couple of 60 tips for helping people who have schizophrenia, and I'm reading some of these tips along with my my experience as well. And I'm not going to read all of these, I'm just reading a few of these. It's important to have boundaries and set clear limits. That is so true. Recognizing that a person has limited capabilities should not mean that you expect nothing of them. As I said before, a person has an illness. They still are a person. They can still, it's not like you have an illness and they just can't do anything. No, they have a personality too. They're human beings. They can do certain things as well. So just kind of keep that in mind. You're not looking at somebody that's so fragile that they can't do anything. So this is so important. That a person you can expect something from them. You don't want to just feel like you can't expect nothing of them, because that's not true. I remember, again, we were having a conversation, and one of the things of working in a clinic, certain things we're just used to. So sometimes a person came in, and he was just like responding to internal stimuli, as we said. He was talking to himself, and we just ignore it. And I remember one time there was someone who who's not used to that, and I believe it was a lawyer, I can't remember. The person wasn't used to it. And they looked around and asked the question, well, why don't people just tell them to stop, right? And we're like, that's a good idea. Why don't you just tell a person to stop? So sometimes we can get used to a certain thing, but keep in mind that if you draw a person's attention to a thing, sometimes they will stop. Sometimes I'll, kind of get their attention, depending on where we are, and they'll realize, because they don't realize what they're doing. So sometimes you can expect certain things from a person who's living with schizophrenia. Sometimes you can redirect. Sometimes you can, they're just not aware that they're doing it, okay? As I said before, it's a natural experience, a lot of different emotions, anger, guilt, fear, all of these are natural emotions. Definitely getting a support system. You got to have that. And realize that you're not alone. I always talk about NAMI all the time, but there are other organizations that are out there. You're going to make mistakes. Some things that you're going to say and do. You're going to get frustrated. You're going to lose your temper. You're going to lose your cool, whatever you call it. Don't beat yourself up. It happens. It's one thing to have to live with a situation for a week, for a month. It's another thing to have to live with a situation for a regular, ongoing basis. Okay, you can be a renowned psychiatrist who works with severe and persistent mental illness all the time, but at home you're living with your loved one, and you can lose your temper. So it definitely it happens. You can get upset. So again, I'm not going to read all of these. There were just some of these I wanted to read. Okay, no one is to blame. Don't forget your sense of humor. Emotional relationships. Revise your expectations. Sometimes you have to pull back, especially when your loved one is getting better. You don't want to put them in a position where they always feel like they're that child-parent relationship, meaning they have no voice. When you get the diagnosis of schizophrenia, you want to talk to the doctor and ask how they came up with that diagnosis, because it could be something else. So you can ask those questions. Understand that mental health professionals vary in their degree of competence. We don't know everything. Our experiences are different. So don't be afraid to ask questions. Don't be afraid to share information if you have information. Many times over the last several years, my clients, the people I've worked with, have shared things with me, okay, that I didn't know, okay? And then I'll ask them, hey, what is it like? So again, because and if you are a person, a mental health professional working in the field, I think it's important that you get as much information as you can about this, because the person you're treating should not always be in a position where they're teaching you either. So if you're going to do the work, you need to should be aware of what the resource is and kind of what's going on. But again, I wanted to just share some tips for helping a person with severe and persistent mental illness. And lastly, I'm going to say, if you have a faith-based perspective, your faith will be so important in dealing with this. Okay, it is important to not just to find the humor in what's going on, but to find faith, to find hope, because there is hope. Okay, to find the hope in what is going on, what's happening. To ask, to pray, prayer. Not just, it's okay to pray that God would heal my loved one or that I'm healed, but as you're praying for that, don't forget to pray and ask for strength, to pray, to ask the Lord for guidance, for wisdom in this particular situation. Pray that you would know how to take care of yourself, for your health. It's important. So number one, tips for helping a person with a severe and persistent mental illness. Number one, as I close, make sure you take care of yourself. Get resources, get support. Don't be afraid to reach out. 3, ask questions. Most importantly, if your loved one, friend, family member is connected to a mental health clinic, that you know who the players are at that clinic, that you get a release of information, have your loved one complete it. If you go in with your loved one, that's better because they know you and you can make sure it's signed at that particular time. Make sure you know if you have a crisis team in your area. Every place does not have a crisis team. If you have a crisis team in your area, make sure you have the number. Make sure you have the after hours number to the clinic where your loved one goes, because every clinic should have an after hours number, for a crisis. Someone that that will, if you call, they will call you back. A lot of the jurisdictions have at the state mental health level. I know in DC, for example, they have a 24/7 crisis number. Mental health suicide hotline is now 988. You can reach out. I have that information on our website. The police should be the last resort, but if you do have to call the police for a mental health crisis, just remember, this is the first time the police are seeing your loved one. You want to make sure that you greet the police. Okay, if you call them, you want to make sure you're out there, you're greeting the police. You want to make sure that you're not panicked. Okay, that you want to try to present a calm picture to the police, because remember, they don't know your loved one, they're feeding off of you. If you're anxious and, oh God, I don't know what to do, then they're going to come in kind of anxious. But you want to explain the situation if possible, because what I try to do, what I always do, is if I'm going to greet the police, I'll walk with the police to the individual, and I'll let the individual know, okay, these are the police officers, remember what you and I talked about. Because what you want to try to do before you call the police, you want to let the person know that you're going to call the police, right? So I always do that. Hey, I'm going to call the police. I think there's something going on here. I'm concerned about you, and the police can help, right? So you want to kind of let the person know that. So it's important. So when the police come, you greet the police if possible. Because you're the one who called. You want to let them know why you called. Try not to present a real panicky picture. You want to try to greet the police. Walk with the police. And hey, Edward, remember I told you I was going to call the police because I'm concerned about you. These are police, so they can help you. You want to try to make that warm handoff if possible. Okay. Sometimes people say, "Oh no, you can't." I know it doesn't always happen that way. Okay. We're talking about severe mental illnesses. We're talking about people. Nothing ever happens like it's supposed to happen in a textbook. That's why you have to be flexible, right? That's why there are certain things that you want to do initially, so that in a crisis you'll have certain things will have already have been done. So initially, if you already know who your loved ones, friends or family who their treatment plan members are, you can call them instead of calling the police in a crisis, right? So again, there are just different, nothing happens 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You got to be flexible with this. I'm just giving you some options, but it's really important, I emphasize this a lot, make sure if you call the police that you are the one that's meeting the police and you're explaining to them what happened in a calm manner. Okay? Because remember, the police are going to feed off of you. If you act like you don't know what's going on, you're anxious, the police, they don't know your loved one. They're just seeing him or her for the first time. And if you're anxious, oh, I don't know, I think he's doing this, he's doing that, then they're going to go in on a, maybe at a heightened level more than they need to. And that's sometimes where challenges or problems come in at, okay? So again, this has been It's Getting Better All the Time mental health outreach, providing information and support while encouraging hope and faith. You can log on to our website at igbatt.com. Again, it's important, if you pray, to continue to read, to understand that God is with you, that Jesus Christ has come, that you might have life and life more abundantly. And part of that life does include, if need be, taking medications, talking to a doctor, going into the hospital so you can get better. Okay? It is when you need to go into to do these things and you don't do it and you don't get better, you're suffering. Okay? And when you're suffering, you're not able to live up to your potential. And when you're not able to live up to your potential, then you're not fulfilling the God-given plan that God has for your life, which means that you're not being all that God has called you to be. So again, I'm going to get off here. It's Getting Better All the Time mental health outreach, providing information